Hey everybody, Brian Zane here. Well, folks, this weekend it's finally happening. After 14 years away, the Ring of Honor Pure Championship is coming back, and there's going to be a 16-man tournament starting this weekend on ROH TV to crown a new champion. And I'm joined by one of the men in that tournament. He is a former two-time Evolve Tag Team Champion, a member of Lifeblood, and one of the toughest vegans you'll ever see. Ladies and gentlemen, Tracy Williams. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
It's funny because, earlier this year, you and I actually were on the road together, like in the same car traveling to shows, but I don't remember us talking to each other that much. But I guess this got to be a way to make up for it is now you're here on the channel with me. So this is our way of kind of catching up on things, making up for lost time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's partially due to the fact that I was probably just very tired, as I am a lot of the time. I feel like, I'm a very tired person until the moment that I go and wrestle. It's like wrestling is like the thing that finally wakes me up in my day. Otherwise I'm just kind of in a haze all the time. So that's probably what you were a victim to. So next, if you catch me right after a match, boom, I'm the most talkative person in the world. But
Sure. We've all been there. It's the one thing that kind of wakes us up. But yeah, so I guess what have you been up to, man? I know you're living in New York, and it's a hotbed of the coronavirus and everything, the pandemic. How are you staying safe, staying sane? What have you been up to?
I feel lucky to be in New York. I'm born and raised here. It's where I'm most comfortable. And I even in this sort of a situation where everything is so strange and there's a pandemic and everything, you at least feel like you're like a part of something. It's like a part of a living environment of just life and activity around you. I think that's probably also a reason why New York went from being such a hotbed of the virus to one of the places that's sort of handled it the best, is because you see the other people around you everywhere you go, and you see the seriousness of the situation, and you feel that sort of little bit of solidarity with everybody around you, and you handle it differently than if you were just stuck out somewhere left to your own thoughts. So I'm lucky to be in the city, lucky to have my dog and my girlfriend here with me, and I've just been staying as occupied as I can. I'm a pro at this quarantine lifestyle anyway. But my job, wrestling, keeps me busy on weekends and on certain dates, but I'm kind of used to that downtime in between. So I feel like, I've been handling it pretty well, to be honest.
And I feel like when the pandemic first happened, the lockdowns occurred, I felt that I was the least impacted in terms of lifestyle change by people compared to people I knew. I already work from home. I don't have to do anything. So no change for me. But you are one of the 16 entrants in the Pure Championship tournament. As I mentioned, begins this weekend. You're in Block A, going against Russ Taylor. And I remember Russ Taylor back when he was Ryan Taylor working in the California Indies. He's a very different wrestler then. I'm really curious to see how this matchup unfolds here. First, we'll talk about your involvement in the tournament, but I also want you to kind of explain, maybe in your own words, what being in the tournament and the possibility of becoming Pure Champion means to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's exactly the kind of thing that I would have picked for myself if I could lay out my own path in wrestling. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that I would have laid out. So I don't take that opportunity lightly and that fact lightly, because it's not that often that you walk into something that seems to just suit you perfectly and is kind of exactly what you'd ask for. And especially, I felt like I had kind of a tough first year in Ring of Honor, where I was still kind of trying to find my footing. And so this was this beacon of light that came out of nowhere, this resurgence of the Pure division, of the Pure Championship, and a Pure tournament. And it was just this golden ring to just try to reach out and grab of this is my spot in wrestling. So I'm not going to miss it.
Who's the guy to watch in the Pure tournament right now? Because there's a field of 16. There's a lot of great talent there. Dalton Castle, Jay Lethal among them. Who's your pick, if not yourself?
Well, yeah, aside from myself, I think it's really interesting in a situation like this, in a tournament that's supposed to be showcasing pure wrestling, where you can't just pick from people that already are in Ring of Honor, because Ring of Honor has all different types of wrestlers who have all different types of strengths and styles. So what I'm really interested to see are the people that are being brought in from outside of Ring of Honor because they live that style of wrestling and are highlighted in that style of wrestling. So I think person to watch is Wheeler Yuta. He's got a really tough first round matchup against Jonathan Gresham, but he actually holds a victory over Jonathan Gresham on the independents. And Wheeler Yuta is somebody that, you know, I've watched closely for his whole career. I've had a bit of a hand in, you know, preparing him for moments like these and working with him in the ring on a lot of occasions. And I think he's got so much to show the wrestling audience that they haven't seen yet from him. And so person to watch, Wheeler Yuta, dark horse, I think.
So, of course, the tournament was taped in the ROH bubble in Baltimore. You were part of that taping. It was a select few. And the process that I heard that went into everything sounds kind of crazy compared to like what wrestling locker rooms are usually like. But talk me through, like, what was it like to be in the ROH bubble?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I mean, I'm somebody who, you know, living in New York during all of this and seeing that, I've been very careful when it comes to precautions in my own personal life and how I've handled the pandemic myself, my own choices. And even for me, it was pretty intense to see like the amount of protocols that were put in place to keep everybody safe, which is, you know, honestly for the better, even if it is, like you said, very far from what we're used to in wrestling locker rooms. I mean, you know, they're kind of just a madhouse a lot of the time. On any level, because that's just what's going to happen when you put a bunch of wrestlers in a locker room and leave them to their own devices. And so in this situation, we were not left to our own devices. We had strict protocols in place, and it was an interesting challenge, I think, for everybody to work around that. Where, you know, just for example, on the actual days of the where we were actually going in the ring and wrestling, I mean, I would show up to the building about an hour before you're supposed to go out and wrestle for the first time that day. And, you know, even that is very different from what you're usually used to in the wrestling show. There's usually a lot of time to prepare, warm up, you know, get your head in the right place. And even like, you know, you have the chance to watch, you know, what's going on before you and you're surrounded by all this activity. Instead, it's just like kind of you show up, you have a very brief time in the locker room, and then you go out and you do your thing, which was, I think, a really interesting challenge and one that I like to think that I rose to. And I was pleasantly surprised by how much I was able to adapt. A lot of the time, wrestling weekends are such like a sort of communal experience of, you know, seeing all your peers. And, you know, it's like a huge part of just like being on the road and doing wrestling and performing and everything. And we didn't have that because we were all isolated in our own hotel rooms for like a whole week, you know, to go through all the procedures and practices to lead up to these events. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. It's definitely different, but I think it worked. And I like to think that we could do it again. I think one of the most interesting things was like I said, I'm somebody who is very careful with the pandemic and with my own practices. But after I had wrestled my opponent in the first round, we returned to the locker room that we were confined to, where we each have our own area of the locker room. It's you know, isolated from the rest of the roster, and we were sort of like reprimanded for not wearing masks in the locker room with each other when we had just like, you know, sweated on each other and grappled with each other for like 15 minutes or whatever. So yeah, and it just goes to show you that, you know, they weren't playing around, which I think is for the better. Better to be, you know, safe than sorry. So
one of the fun parts, I think, of the ROH loops are those opportunities to be social and everything. If not in the locker room, then, you know, someplace in the hotel lobby after the show or whatever. And there's none of that. Did you feel like, could you detect any kind of anxiety or stir craziness in any of your peers because like they didn't have that opportunity?
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody was going a little nuts, especially not having wrestled at all for, you know, probably for some people the longest time they've ever gone without wrestling. For me, the only time I've gone longer without wrestling was when I broke my arm in like one of the first years of my career. And that kept me out for like 8 months. But even then, I mean, when you have an injury, you're like focused on recovering. You like can like see the light at the end of the tunnel. You have this goal. Instead, everybody's just kind of sitting at home, like fully capable of wrestling, but not being able to. And so like leading up to your first time back in the ring, for me, I hadn't even been in a wrestling ring in 6 months. You have no distractions because you're just locked in your own room, isolated. And so you need to find ways to deal with, you know, those sort of nerves and thoughts of leading up to this thing that you can wrestle, but you haven't done it in a long time. And now you got a week to just like sit and get ready for that. But in a way that was a plus because it allowed me to, I think, get focused in a way that sometimes I don't when you're kind of taking it for granted and you're wrestling very often. And, you get into the habit of just like show up, do the thing, everything's normal. But it really gave me time to, sit and get focused on what I had to do and what the goal was in front of me. So in a way, it was beneficial for me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, 6 months without wrestling, you said, and you had your first match back in the bubble and everything. How did that feel? I mean, just to be out of not having wrestled and not having worked a match in that long, and now you're back in there kind of going in almost cold. Like, what was that experience like for you?
I was way more concerned about it leading up to it than I was than it was like an actual problem once I got in. I mean, once you get in, it's like, if you know how to wrestle, you know how to wrestle. And so it also was kind of another way that was kind of beneficial was like, as much as I love having an audience and can't wait to get back into that environment, I mean, in the environment that we were in, you literally only have one thing to focus on. There's nothing to distract you. There's nothing else that can get in your head aside from the person that you're wrestling. And so in that way, it was beneficial. But then also, as a wrestler, we always aim to entertain. We aim to put on a good fight for the crowd. And the way that, I determine whether or not I had a good fight is the reaction that we get. And without any reaction, I was left not even knowing by the time the match was over. Like, okay, I know the result of the match as far as, win or loss, but I have no gauge on whether or not that was like a good fight, like to watch, because we don't have that reaction. So it was interesting to deal with not having that feedback and then having to sort of adjust your mind to that going forward.
Yeah, do you almost kind of want the Thunderdome experience? Kind of want the crowd noise piped in there just to have some kind of confirmation?
I mean, I would rather what we had than that, to be honest. I mean, that I think would be like a huge distraction. I can't imagine how weird that is to like, like get into like a scrap with somebody and you're like fighting them. And then all of a sudden you just hear these like, piped in like dot wave robot voices coming through the loudspeakers. It's like very surreal. It's definitely interesting what they've done. And it's interesting to see how every different organization is approaching this. And, it's like every single place has a different flavor to it. And every flavor has its own, I think pros and cons and appeals to like a different audience and a different viewer. And I think that's great. It's much better to do it that way than to have just this set of standards that like every single company is following and then everything is cookie cutter. I like that everybody's approaching this situation differently.
It's all about what makes you different in the market, and whether it's the in-ring product or even the presentation. I think that also kind of like in this world we live in now where there's like little to no people in arenas, like how do you do it differently and how do you dress it up differently? So going back to the stuff with Evolve for a second, let's talk about that for a little bit, your time in Evolve. You were probably best known as a member of Catchpoint, working with Drew Gulak and Yehai and Matt Riddle and TJ Perkins, etc. You've all gone on to do great things. How important were Drew Gulak and Catchpoint to your career in your time there when you were working in Evolve?
I mean, super important. It was definitely a turning point because, I'd been close with Drew for my whole career. We trained together, by the time I started training, he was already, somewhat established, but we were, as the kind of wrestler that he is, he was always, in training, always, learning and helping and teaching and that sort of thing. And so we were like already close friends and like, affiliated for a long time. But up to that point in my career, I was wrestling because I loved doing it. And it was like this thing I'd always wanted to do, the only thing that I could imagine myself doing. And so that was like, what that was it for me. I was like, okay, great. Like, this is amazing. I'm wrestling. But then you get to a certain point in your career where you need to either step on the gas or like hang it up. And that was the moment of like, me finally seeing what my path in wrestling could be and like where I really could apply myself and hopefully make a positive change and present the kind of thing that I like to see as somebody who watches wrestling and the kind of thing that I'm passionate about that doesn't need to be a secondary focus and that I can put that on the front stage, which is what Catchpoint was. It was Drew and I being given the freedom and the platform to present the kind of wrestling that we felt strongly about. And hopefully, you know, attract people to that. And I think we did. And it was definitely the spark that, you know, showed me I should keep going with this and keep, you know, plugging away at this kind of wrestling and trying to be the best, you know, professional wrestler that I could be. So definitely a turning point, definitely like, I think for a lot of people in their careers, you know, when they get to that point where when Evolve is looking at them, it's like a great like place to really hone what you do to potentially eventually bring it to, you know, an even bigger stage if you choose to do that. I think, yeah, so many people have done that. I'm glad and lucky to be one of them. And yeah, I mean, and I like that it also takes people to different places. You know, it's another kind of freedom we have in wrestling now where like, that's a great platform. But like you said, a lot of my friends who I was, you know, growing with there have moved on to WWE or Japan or all these other places. I've gone to Ring of Honor. It's like there are all these great, you know, end games, so to speak, or next steps that you can get to. So it's really nice to see.
Right. You think about the influence like Catchpoint and like you talk about the style of wrestling you guys wanted to present. And yeah, it has certainly branched out like in so many ways, like you said. It is such a prevalent style now, and you see that from every company now. So it's pretty cool. So circling back to your ROH debut, after spending 4 years in Evolve, you come to ROH. After your debut, you become part of Lifeblood. And that is a big group that started with Juice Robinson, and you see yourself, Tennille Dashwood, Bandito, Mark Haskins, Dave Finlay. What was it like to have that big kind of pomp and circumstance? You had the whole lights cut out and come back in to all reveal. What was that moment like for you?
I mean, it was interesting. It was a bit surreal. I mean, it's like it was new for us as well. You know, like it was. I think everybody was kind of like excited about what was to come, but also kind of confused, which I guess I can understand. But I think, you know, we kind of felt the same way. But we knew what our goal was, and I think the thing that confused people was that maybe they didn't understand what our goal was. But what I really liked about it was that we were all, you know, very different. It was like I saw the potential in it, as I did with, you know, Catchpoint in the past, to sort of present ourselves in the best light possible and try to turn our image of wrestling towards what we want to be. But what I liked about it was that we all had a different sort of view of what that was. But our uniting goal was that, you know, Ring of Honor should be this place where the best in-ring professional wrestling takes place. And, you know, and that means, you know, following the code of honor before the match, shaking hands, putting on the best professional wrestling match you can, no matter what your fighting style is, and, you know, succeeding in that way. And that was the goal. But, you know, the cookie crumbles in a different way sometimes. And, you know, people's careers take different turns. You know, it was like a lot of factions sort of end up running into problems when there's like inner fighting or there's like drama within the group or people don't get along and all of a sudden they split. That wasn't the case here. It was just that naturally, you know, people's careers went in different directions and everybody sort of had to pivot and find their own focuses for how they wanted to move forward and succeed. Like I said, there were no hard feelings with anybody. It was just like life deals you a hand and you gotta sometimes pivot and rethink it. And like the good thing about it is that there's always going to be some other path. There's always going to be something else that opens up for you. Like each step you take, like that step becomes the road that you're on. And so that's what I just kept doing, was just every opportunity I had to wrestle, just take that next step forward, try to win, try to put on the best match possible. And here I am in the second year of my Ring of Honor contract with the pure title tournament in front of me. It's like, I wouldn't change a thing, to be honest. You know, no matter like whichever obstacles were in the way or whichever curveballs were thrown at us, like here I am. So that's the good part, I think, you know.
That is a very good outlook to have. So yes, there is the pure tournament. That is the big focus starting this weekend on ROH TV. But in the long term, we're talking about, you know, what's next for Tracy Williams. You know, win, lose this tournament, no matter what happens here. What are your other goals in Ring of Honor as you enter the second year?
Well, I think the goal in Ring of Honor, obviously primarily, is to win the pure title tournament. But it goes beyond that, because that would just be the first step in continuing what my goal has been for my whole time here. Only now my focus is, you know, laser pointed, is way more clear, because now the focus begins there. That's the next step. And then what that means is starting to rebuild Ring of Honor as what I believe it should be, and I can't do that alone. We've got a great roster of people here. There's so many great wrestlers here. I think everybody feels the same way. But like I said, everybody's their own individual. So everybody feels like they need to put it on their back and they need to be the one to make that big break and push it forward. So that's the next goal for me. Win the Pure title and then use that as my stepping stone to shape Ring of Honor as the wrestling company that I really know that it can be, and do my part to show that. I'm only one wrestler and we've got so many great wrestlers, but I need to show that I'm the greatest. So I need to really bring my best coming forward. And I think the Pure title tournament is a great first step to do that.
I look forward to seeing that future take place. Thank you so much, Tracy, for your time in this interview. Good luck in the tournament starting this weekend. And any last words before we wrap this up?
Oh, everybody be good to each other. And, check out the Ring of Honor Pure title tournament wherever you can find it. And thank you for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
You bet, Tracy. Thanks so much. And for Tracy Williams, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.